Gigabyte have introduced a larger 17-inch model of their Aero laptop, and it's available with some excellent specs. So just how well does it perform in games? I've benchmarked 20 different games at all setting levels to show you how well it runs and compared it against some other laptops to see the differences. Just quickly before we jump into the benchmark results, I'll cover off the specs in my unit. I've got the XA model. There's an 8-core Intel i9-9980HK CPU, 90W NVIDIA RTX 2070 Max-Q graphics, and 16GB of memory running in dual channel. The new Aero 17 is available with different specs though. You can find examples and updated prices linked in the description. I don't think the Aero 17 has been designed with gaming in mind. It's more of a machine for content creators, hence the 4K screen and the fact that it came with NVIDIA Studio drivers installed. With that said, if it's got decent specs like these, we can still play games on it, and it's worth seeing how well it does, as even creators will take a break to play games. So for this game testing, I've installed NVIDIA Game Ready drivers for best performance. The Control Center software allows us to define the CPU limits in 6 stages, and 2 stages for the GPU. However, no overclocking or undervolting is done for us. I've tested these games at the highest limits for best performance, so up to 80 watts on the CPU and 90 watts on the GPU, along with the latest version of Windows and NVIDIA drivers at the time of testing. We'll only be covering gaming performance here, so if you're new to the channel, you'll definitely want to get subscribed for the upcoming full review. Alright, let's start out by going through all 20 games at all setting levels, then afterwards we'll see how the new Aero 17 compares with some other laptops. Battlefield 5 was tested in campaign mode rather than multiplayer. I've tested with RTX off in the purple bars and RTX on in the green bars. With RTX on, it was still playing well enough at high settings. Ultra wasn't too terrible either due to the high 1% low performance. Personally, I'd rather play at Ultra with RTX off, as it both looks good and runs well, and we'll see how this game compares with some others soon. Battlefield 1 was also tested in campaign mode, and like always, it's running well and performing better than the newer Battlefield 5 just shown. Compared to other laptops with the same RTX 2070 Max-Q graphics I've tested, the 1% low was clearly higher over the i7 machines. Apex Legends was tested with either all settings at maximum or all settings at the lowest possible values, as it doesn't have predefined setting presets. It was still playing well with maximum settings, however with minimum settings we could boost average FPS by 36%, though I didn't see much of a difference in this test compared to other i7 laptops with similar graphics. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was tested with the built-in benchmark. The results from this test were looking pretty great at lower settings due to the high CPU power limit, and the results were still better than most 2070 Max-Q machines at higher settings. Though it was close, but we'll see how this game and others compare later. The Division 2 was tested using the built-in benchmark. While the average frame rates aren't too different when compared with other 2070 Max-Q machines, the 1% low, in particular at ultra settings, was noticeably improved in this test. Again, likely due to the higher powered 8-core i9 CPU. Far Cry New Dawn was tested with the built-in benchmark. This game seems to be fairly CPU heavy, however it was one where I didn't actually find that much of a difference when compared to other i7 laptops. Though I have noted before in my desktop CPU comparisons that Far Cry tends to not work too well with increased core counts. Far Cry 5 was also tested with the built-in benchmark, and the results were ahead of the newer Far Cry New Dawn just covered, and we'll see how this one compares to some other laptops later. Fortnite was tested with the replay feature, and Epic settings were still working just fine with 130 FPS averages and relatively high 1% low performance, with much higher frame rates possible at the lower setting levels. Overwatch is another well-optimized game and was tested in the practice range, as other players, bots, and even different maps in actual gameplay affect the frame rate, and this allows for consistent testing. The 300 FPS frame cap was hit at low settings, while even max settings was still averaging well above 100 FPS for the 1% low and was playing very well. Metro Exodus was tested using the built-in benchmark. Most parts of the game perform a fair bit better than this, so don't take these results as a good indication of what to expect throughout the entire game. It's more of a worst case, but does let you perform the same test to compare against. CSGO was tested using the Euletical FPS benchmark, and as a game that's pretty CPU bound, we're seeing above average results compared to most i7-9750H laptops that I've tested. Machines like the Lenovo Y740 with same GPU but i7 CPU will beat it though, due to the option of disabling NVIDIA Optimus, which I've found helps out quite a bit in games such as this with high frame rates. Rainbow Six Siege was tested with the built-in benchmark, and the results weren't too different in this test compared to similarly spec'd machines. Don't get me wrong, still excellent performance, but it doesn't seem that the extra CPU cores and slight clock speed difference helps here compared to an i7. PUBG was tested using the replay feature, and the results between very low and high settings are higher than what we usually see with most laptops in this test, and there wasn't really a practical difference in terms of FPS between these setting levels, while Ultra was still able to average above 100 FPS. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was tested with the built-in benchmark, and from my experience seems to be a fairly CPU-heavy game. There's not much of a boost over most other laptops I've tested though. Still fairly similar average FPS, however I was seeing higher 1% lows due to the CPU compared to say the Y740 with same GPU but i7 CPU. Dota 2 was tested playing in the middle lane with an average amount of action going on, and is yet another game that I've found to prefer higher CPU power, which explains why the average frame rates at lower settings are higher than the 9750H machines I usually test. Granted, not by enough to make a practical difference as we're already around 200 FPS. Watch Dogs 2 is a resource-heavy game, but in my opinion is still playable with a stable 30 FPS. So even at ultra settings with our higher than 60 FPS average, it's playing very well without any issues. And I don't often see 100 FPS being reached at all in this title when it comes to laptops. So that seems to be due to the i9. Ghost Recon is another resource-intensive game and was tested using the built-in benchmark. Around 50 FPS at ultra is a pretty decent result from this test in my experience, as you generally need a very powerful laptop to reach 60 FPS, though much higher is of course possible at lower settings. The Witcher 3 was playing well with Hairworks disabled. I've found this to be a somewhat more GPU demanding title. For quick comparison, the average frame rates are close to the Y740 I tested with 2070 Max-Q. However, the 1% lows with the i9 are 10 to 20 FPS higher than the i7. Doom was tested using Vulkan, and is a game that almost always gets really high frame rates. There wasn't really that much difference between the different setting levels, still over 140 FPS at max settings, with well above 100 for the 1% low, which shows it was running perfectly smoothly. Strange Brigade was another game that was tested with Vulkan, and this one was also running well with the built-in benchmark. Still around 120 FPS at ultra settings and above 200 at low settings, with relatively high 1% low results compared to averages. Let's also take a look at how this config of the new Aero 17 compares with other laptops to see how it stacks up. Use these results as a rough guide only, as they were tested at different times with different drivers. In Battlefield 5, I've got the Aero 17 highlighted in red near similarly spec'd machines, including the new Aero 15 OLED just below it. In terms of average FPS, the result is right in line with the Aero 15 and Lenovo Y740, both of which are machines with the same GPU but i7 CPU. However, the average from the Razer Blade Pro 17 with same GPU is significantly higher, as that machine undervolts the CPU, overclocks the graphics, and boosts the GPU power limit higher. I'm only testing these machines at their best stock settings, so with some tweaks we could also improve the Aero 17. However, even at stock, due to the superior i9 CPU with higher clock speeds and more cores, we're getting the highest 1% low result out of all machines tested. This 1% result is ahead of the average FPS in the SCAR 2 with RTX 2060, just for comparison. Here are the results from Far Cry 5 with ultra settings and the built-in benchmark. I found this to be a pretty CPU heavy test, though unlike the last game, we're not seeing results too different from the other similarly spec'd machines. The average FPS was again in line with most of the other 2070 Max-Q machines tested, though the 1% low was a little ahead of the others, again most likely due to the higher CPU performance. The difference is just much smaller in this title. These are the results from Shadow of the Tomb Raider with the built-in benchmark at highest settings. Once more, the average frame rates are very similar to the other 2070 Max-Q machines tested, again with the exception of the Blade Pro, as that's just tuned very well out of the box. Still though, the Aero 17 holds up nicely here. I'll be overclocking and undervolting the Aero 17 in future videos, so keep an eye out for those. Overall, the new Gigabyte Aero 17 laptop is providing high levels of performance. Many RTX 2070 Max-Q laptops I've used cap the GPU power limit at 80 watts. So the option of boosting this to 90 watts improves performance. Likewise, the 8-core i9 CPU with 80 watt power limit is a step up over the usual i7 9750H machines I've tested previously. And while it can be overclocked, we've only looked at stock performance here. Again, I'll cover overclocking in detail in future content. It does really depend on the game though. Some games saw very similar performance to a laptop with same GPU but i7 9750H. Especially in terms of average FPS. Higher 1% low performance was more common with the i9, while other games saw no noticeable improvements. Of course, not all games are really going to care about the difference between 6 and 8 cores, so different results are expected. This might change more once we boost the clock speed with some overclocking though. While my Aero 17 came with a 4K screen, I've only tested games at 1080p here, and they looked fine to me. But let me know if you also want to see some games tested at 4K for the upcoming full review video. And let me know what you thought about the gaming performance from the new Aero 17 laptop down in the comments. If you're new to the channel, you'll definitely want to get subscribed for the full review to see everything this new machine is offering.